All right, so I'll sit with Representative. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us. We are doing this a little bit differently because you had to call an audible. You have a press conference to go to. So we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation than we normally do. But first of all, you're serving in the House of Representatives. You're in District 133. I'll post a picture for anybody not able to follow us live. Can you tell us a little bit about District 133?
Yeah, so it is the southwest side of Springfield from Republic Road to just up north of Chestnut Expressway. And then on the west side, it's kind of Golden up to West Bypass on the far north side, and then starts off kind of inward Kansas Avenue, kicks out to Campbell and sort of follows Campbell, sort of.
I have to ask, your district has a tail.
It does have a tail. It's a very cute tail.
It's like what do they call that when you don't fully lose your tail? It's like a vestigial tail?
Sure, yeah. It's a school, actually.
Oh, a school.
So they did follow municipal lines, generally speaking, and so because the school is there, it just kind of caught that little spot. It was interesting when they redrew the maps, and I saw that, I'm like, really? Whose house are they grabbing? But it was a school, so yeah.
Ma'am, how'd you get into state politics?
Well, to not go into too long of a story, I own a private business here in Springfield providing speech therapy, occupational physical therapy, and over the course of several years in that business, I found that there were issues at the state level that made it challenging for me to provide services to the children that I wanted to provide care to. And so I started advocating at the state level and just sort of meeting legislators, having conversations. And in those conversations, I realized we have a lot of legislators that care a lot. They really want to do good work, but their knowledge base is their knowledge base. Their skill set is their skill set. And one piece that I found sort of lacking or missing to some extent was a real true knowledge in healthcare and the way that the funding flows for Medicare, Medicaid, and all those pieces in a strong sense, as well as serving children with disabilities, having a strong disability advocate at the Capitol. And so those were the things that kind of turned me toward running for office.
What is your job? What are you doing all day? What's your job like? What's your day-to-day?
Well, it changes every day, and that's one thing I really love about the Capitol is every day is different. We have committees that we attend and are a part of. Everyone is a member of different committees, so I'm personally on 4 committees. All of my committees meet on Mondays and Tuesdays, so my Mondays and Tuesdays are really jam-packed with session on the floor, actually debating bills on the floor with everyone, also committees, meetings with constituents that come up to the Capitol, meetings with just interested parties throughout the state or even nationally that come into the Capitol to visit with us about different topics. My Wednesdays and Thursdays you would think would be slower. I don't have committees, I don't have all those things going on, but I spend a lot of my time going over to the Senate and talking with our Senate colleagues about my bills, and as they're moving, trying to kind of piece together what that process looks like, meeting with my colleagues about different things. And so Wednesdays and Thursdays are also very busy. Thursdays typically end a little earlier than other days, and so typically I'm home Thursday by about dinner time, which is
normally
nice.
When we've had these conversations in the past, it's almost always been Fridays.
Right.
Fridays tend to be your. Now, obviously, a lot of students don't know this. You and I take it for granted because we've been in it for years, or at least you have. But you are in the House for 5 months out of the year. Am I getting that right?
That's right. Really about 4.5 months. So we start the first week or 2 of January and end kind of in mid-May. And so really it's a short time to get a lot of work done.
Why? What are you doing for 7 months, 6 months out of the year?
Yeah. Back home working. So I have a full-time job. I serve as the Vice President of Therapy Services at the Arc of the Ozarks. And then meeting with constituents, working on bills for the next session, going across the state and touring different places and facilities and organizations, just learning more about the ways that things that we put in place as lawmakers may be impacting other people so that we can hopefully find resolutions for those things.
Well, so you are a Republican.
That's right.
We've been lucky enough to be visited by a Democrat as well. Why are you a Republican as opposed to any other political party?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is that I'm interested in limited government as much as possible. I'm not interested in, generally speaking, creating large government programs or those types of things. And I'm also interested in just individual liberty, making sure that people have their individual rights maintained to make choices in the matter for themselves.
So I will only ask you, I will exercise incredible restraint and only ask you one national question.
Oh, okay.
Only one national
That's
question.
probably good. Try and
then we'll stick.
keep it
And then
local,
we'll stick to local and state.
Sure.
But one national question, probably one of the biggest issues in America, is the fact that we have a presidential race coming up this
Sure.
November,
Yeah.
and we now know who the candidates are.
Mhm.
And it's not you are, I believe, half the age of both of these candidates.
Sure.
So anyways, the Republican candidate has been indicted for 91 different charges. Ostensibly, he will sit criminal trial eventually. And there's a fair chance that at least a couple of these trials, he could be convicted before the election. Does a presidential candidate in your party getting convicted of a crime affect your vote? How do you see this whole process?
You know, I think when we look at topics like this, it's really difficult for someone like me who, wants to support the party, wants to support the ideals that surround the Republican Party, right? And in this presidential election, we're stuck in a situation where we have two candidates, right? We have our Republican candidate, our Democrat candidate. Obviously, my views as a Republican are going to align more with the Republican candidate, but I think we have a lot to see and a lot left to figure out before that election. And as you said, if other things come out on one side or the other for our presidential candidate, then those may be things I have to consider.
I am of two minds when it comes to these trials. Obviously, I believe you and I are of the same opinion. Nobody's above the law.
Mm-hmm.
To have a criminal trial in the summer or fall leading up to the campaign, leading up to the election, not a fan.
Yeah.
Not a fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we, the voters, have a right to know whether he is alleged or whether he's convicted. And so I'm of two minds on that. I don't want a campaign, especially if he's acquitted, to unfairly.
Impact.
Yeah, so how do you calculate that?
Well, I mean, I think you're right in that regard. And I think the thing that I struggle with most is, we had years for them to do this work prior to this moment. So I think it begs the question, why this moment? Are there people who are trying to impact his ability to run for office, not because they think that he should be convicted, but because they think that the process will challenge that? I don't know, and I haven't ever really been involved. I'm not an attorney, obviously. I haven't really been involved in those types of things, so I don't know. Maybe the process just takes that long to get to this point, but we're talking about, things that have happened years and years and years ago. Why weren't these things brought forward at a different time?
Ma'am, let's transition to Missouri. There is a gajillion things going on in Missouri right now. Before we talk about some of these broader issues, really, you and I messaged a few months back because a bill that you had thrown your blood, sweat, and tears into got signed into law about postpartum care.
Yeah.
First of all, for the men among us, what is that?
Sure.
Second of all, what did you you and many friends get accomplished?
Yeah, so postpartum care is the care that is provided to a woman after the pregnancy is over. So after she has the baby and she's trying to care for that baby. And in the state of Missouri, we only allowed for women on Medicaid 60 days, which is only 2 months. And for anyone that has had a baby or had a spouse that's had a baby or been around a mom who's had a new baby, that's not very long. There are a lot of issues that can arise for a woman after those 60 days, and many of them can be life-threatening. And so there were people who were working before last session on this issue, but it really came alive last session. And I was just telling a different class yesterday what a true joy it was for me to work on that bill and be a part of the team that got that across the finish line. There were a lot of challenges in the process. I'm one of 163 House members. There are 34 senators. Everyone gets to have an opinion, and everyone gets to try and put their information or put their kind of stamp on a bill as it goes through the process. And there were a lot of bumps in the road, I will say. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in that process is that I was able to find a way to stand my ground and to really tell the women of Missouri that I'm here to help take care of them and make sure that they have the care that they need. 12 months is kind of in research and in science where we look at that postpartum period and where we get data from. So it makes sense that we would extend that to 12 months to make sure that women have that postpartum care to alleviate any kind of concerns that they have that their medical needs won't be met. I think the statistic last year that we talked about was that 75% of maternal deaths after having a baby were preventable. And that means that if a mom had access to health care, that could potentially be remedied and they wouldn't have to lose their life and that child wouldn't have to live their life without a mother. So
isn't that cool?
Oh,
you
my gosh.
got a bill. So when that happened, are you popping champagne? What's it like to get a piece of your piece of legislation passed?
Yeah, it's pretty emotional.
Yeah.
You know, I went.
What's the time journey?
So
They want to take to, was it a year plus? Was it a year less?
no, the governor generally signs bills in the summer, and so it was kind of, I believe it was in July when he signed that bill. And then later in the year, I was able to go to the bill signing, which was really neat. We did it at a hospital, and the bill sponsor in the Senate, Senator Elaine Gannon, it was in her district. And so it was really meaningful to sit in front of a group of people impacted, physicians that are excited about being able to provide this care for women, and watch the governor kind of ceremonially sign the bill. It was really amazing.
Did you get to be one of the weird people standing behind him when
I
he
did.
does that? Those always look, I know what you're doing, you're demonstrating, but it always looks weird to me when Biden, Trump, Parson signs something and there's a bunch of people just watching him write.
It is, and it's always, I always like looking at them and finding like the one person that has their eyes closed,
Yeah.
or the one person that's kind of like looking off
Oh,
or
God
something.
forbid. Some of these people bring their kids. What are you doing? All right, so anyways, we love kids here, but regardless. So I have so many excellent questions from students that I want to grill you with, and of course I do want to invite anybody in the room that might be interested in joining the conversation as well. Support, challenge, anything. Representative Stinnett has the right of refusal, but is generally really awesome at it. But the one question I didn't get from these students is maybe one of the biggest issues this year. Obviously, the General Assembly makes laws. That's what you guys do. But we, the people, can get around you by getting enough signatures on petitions, adding it to the ballot, and then we, the people, can vote on it. In the past, we have normally seen a handful of these things all over our ballots. I believe you guys are pursuing reforms to that. What reforms are you pursuing, and why?
So I think to answer that question, we have to back up a little bit and make sure everyone understands what initiative petition is. This is something that I didn't know a lot about when I was elected and have kind of been given lots of information. And so there are two different types of initiative petitions. There's the constitutional initiative petition, and then there's the statutory initiative petition. The constitutional initiative petition process places something into our Constitution. And once that is done, the only way to remove, change, fix anything that may be in it that isn't quite up to par is to have another constitutional amendment go on the ballot. For the statutory initiative petition, that also goes on the ballot, but then the legislature can adjust that as needed. I think there's some value to both sides of this conversation. A lot of people are against changing the initiative petition process for the Constitution because they feel like, as you mentioned, people have placed things on the ballot that are important to them and they have passed when maybe the legislature hasn't responded yet or is taking too long to respond to an issue. The challenge with that I typically talk about and bring up is I think we have a couple of examples, especially in recent elections, where we've had ballot issues like our marijuana legislation, which, you know, feel how you want to about marijuana one way or the other, But there are 17 different components to the legislation or to that law that was placed into our Constitution that can now not be changed unless we have another constitutional amendment. So some of those things include information about business practice, how we assign, who can have a business license and who can't for selling of these products, packaging requirements, what can be on packages, and how we want to limit that for children's access to those things. The Constitution itself in the state of Missouri is the 4th longest in the nation. And we have things like bingo. We have lots of interesting things in our Constitution. And I think when we think about the Constitution, it should be a sacred document that gives kind of general guidelines for how our government is run in the state. I do think, flip the coin to the statutory component, our legislature I guess I should rephrase that, our legislature has an easy process to negate the will of the people through the legislature if they don't agree with a statutory change. And I think that has kind of been the precipice for why we've seen these constitutional amendments. I think we could probably strengthen the IP reform process for the Constitution while also strengthening the voice of the people through the statutory process. And I think that's what I would be a proponent of. We've seen a lot of things go back and forth through the House and through the Senate this year, but that's what I would like to see. And what that would look like on the statutory side would probably be like a cooling off period. So if something passed on the ballot, maybe it would be 3, 4, 5, 6 years before the legislature could change those things. Maybe that looks like a little bit more than just a simple majority in the House and the Senate to pass a change to that, before that time. Lot of different options, but I do think there's value in having a conversation around initiative petition reform for our constitutional measures.
I have 2 students that have asked from 2 different classes who've asked very different versions of the same question. One of the biggest events in Missouri of the last couple months was a tragic shooting at the Chiefs Super Bowl parade. Oh my God. Anyways, so Colton Feemster from a class asks, I'm speaking in his voice, I have heard that some parts of the government want to take away people's guns. As before, I don't know if they found a solution yet, but how do you plan to protect the people's right to own firearms? Because if they do ban firearms, that would not stop some people from getting their hands on them. Paula McNinch asks a different version of that question, quoting the Republican platform, saying, we believe in the right of Missourians to be secure in their persons, their homes, and their communities. So she says, what measures would you take in light of the mass shooting in Kansas City after the parade?
Yeah, so I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. I think that, as the student mentioned, banning firearms doesn't keep criminals from getting firearms. So I think when you look at our nation, banning from here going forward, if we said, okay, we'll ban, firearms, that doesn't negate the fact that there are tons of people who already have firearms, and what do you do about those things? I think it's a sensitive topic, and I think it's something that has to be thought through in a. I don't want to say you should take away the emotionality of a conversation, and especially after something like a shooting happens close by to where you live. You can't certainly just remove that emotion, but I think we have to think about these things from a logical standpoint as well, and make sure that we aren't putting things in place that would then create a situation where everyday citizens weren't able to protect themselves because criminals will continue to be criminals.
Another one of the big questions, we got lots of questions on a couple issues. One of them was LGBTQ related. 2 students ask a similar question. Danielle Martin asks, you voted no, ma'am, on the prohibition for gender-affirming care for minors. What is your fear with allowing minors to receive gender-affirming care? And do you know the steps that go into being allowed to receive gender-affirming care as a minor? Ethan Sales asks, the 2023, another quote of the platform, it states that protecting the God-given rights of the people. And so Ethan says, with 82% of transgender individuals considering suicide and 40% attempting, I haven't fact-checked those numbers, but I really hope they're not right. That is a depressing stat. Why would you vote to prohibit any healthcare provider from providing gender-affirming care, gender transitioning surgery, or puberty-blocking drugs for minors under 18 years of age? He asks, is access to healthcare not considered a God-given right in your eyes?
So when we were having conversations around that bill last year, the thing that really struck me was this conversation around access to different drugs and surgeries for children. I think that there are a lot of ways that our government seeks to protect children, and I view this as a way to ensure that we weren't allowing children to make decisions early on in their life that would have a long-term impact. I work with children on a daily basis, and I see the significant impact of various pharmaceuticals on them. And these are drugs that are meant for things like ADHD that are really viewed to be pretty benign generally, but I can see how they impact a child, and everybody's chemistry is different. So it's very difficult to say, well, we're going to do this thing and it's not going to impact you long term, because I see that in these children with different types of drugs. I'm not a proponent of limiting that after the age of 18. I think, once you're an adult, then those things are your choice. But I think having concern for the long-term impact of those things from a child's mind and those decision-making processes is where kind of I landed on that.
So, sharp left turn. Question from Caitlin Silkey. What are your we always get questions on minimum wage. Always get questions. Consider they're college students, right?
Sure.
What are your thoughts on the current minimum wage in Springfield?
So I think we had this question last time I came and talked with you, and it does make sense for college students to bring it up. From a business owner's perspective, having owned a business for almost 10 years, the challenge with raising minimum wage is that cost has to go somewhere. And I think when we look at, raising minimum wage, you're raising costs within a company, and then services, goods, in turn start to cost more money. And so it's a balance. Obviously, we want people to have a livable wage, but it's something to be considered whenever we're raising minimum wage, and then in turn, we wonder why the cost of goods and services are going up. That's something that we're kind of putting on to those businesses.
So I also got a question from Avery Elliott, an online student, asks, as a member of the House, I think we kind of already talked about that, daily activities. Instead, I will ask a question from Haley Murphy, more about you. This is a question kind of only women can answer. She says, do you think you are treated the same as the men in our General Assembly?
I personally feel like there are rooms full of men where I walk in and I feel completely accepted and like they respect me. There are rooms full of men where I don't feel that way. Conversely, I think the same can be said for groups of women. Some rooms full of women I can walk in and feel generally accepted. Some rooms full of women I walk in and I don't. So I don't really like to kind of segment it that way. I will say there are times in the legislature where, I'm in a room and I feel like, I have to sort of be, I have to be my own biggest cheerleader, right? In the legislature, there are a lot of competing opinions and thoughts, and so I have to build that confidence within myself. But I would be not being completely truthful if I didn't say that it seems to generally be a place run by men, and you have to overcome that some days.
We are in a, speaking of women's issues, we are in a state that is in our legislature and among the voter body largely pro-life. Where do you fall on the issue? Where do Missouri's laws stand now? And if I made you Emperor Stinnett, what would you tinker with them one way or another?
Yeah, I think, so post the Dobbs decision, we had a trigger ban in the state of Missouri that made our state, there are no abortions in our state. That is something that I'm generally in line with. I think that what we see happening right now was the intention of Dobbs, though. It should go to the states, and the states should decide, and that's what we're going to see soon.
So Jenna LaBarge asks about inflation. She says it seems like it was a major thing in our country these past years. Where do you stand on the increased price changes, and what has been done for that to settle down?
Well, I think inflation is largely driven federally, so it's a challenge for us to deal with at the state level, certainly with the costs of goods and services. As I mentioned, I think kind of our minimum wage laws can impact that at the state level, but generally speaking, I think that's an issue that is largely driven by decisions at the federal level, federal spending, and all that kind of thing. I think being fiscally responsible within our state with our budget goes a long way to making sure that we don't kind of add on top of what we're seeing because of the federal government.
Bailey Ferguson asks another living your life in the house job. She asks, how long do you have to be running? I love how she phrases this. How long do you have to be running until you know if you've made it or not? How do you go from living a normal life to being in the house? How does that alter your family, or does it?
That's a really great question.
It
That
is.
would
It's a good
probably
one.
take me the rest of the time together to answer. I announced that I was running for office in October of 2021, and I didn't know if I had won until November of 2022. So it's a long journey. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of work before you're even elected. You have to make this commitment of time, sometimes your own money, and all of this effort. So it's got to be worthwhile to you in many ways, right? I knocked thousands of doors. I knocked through my district completely twice while I was running, and so meeting my constituents and talking with people every day, and it was a really interesting journey. The change in my life has mostly been driven by the fact that I'm gone. I'm from January through mid-May, Monday, sometimes I go up on Sunday evenings, but Monday morning through Thursday afternoon, I'm away from my family. I have 2 kids that are 10 and 13 and a husband at home. And so much of probably what was, kind of laid on top of me as a mom fell onto him pretty immediately. But we're in a great situation, unlike some other families. And so my husband stays home, and so he kind of manages that, and life for my kids didn't really change a whole lot, which is really nice. I was running my business and working a lot before, so there were nights that I was either away from home for an evening here or there. Certainly it's a little bit more during this kind of condensed period, but when I'm home I just prioritize time with my family and try and kind of compartmentalize, if you will, where I'm at, when I'm there. When I'm here, I want to be focused on what I'm doing here. When I'm home, I want to be focused on what I'm doing there. And it's a challenge. I'm certainly not perfect at it. You could probably ask my husband that, maybe my kids too. But I hope what my kids learn from this process of everything that I'm doing, and it was what I wanted to instill in them, owning my business and helping children with disabilities, is service to your community is priceless. It's so important. We need great, committed people who are willing to do the work, and I hope that it kind of sparks that for them. I hope that it's something they enjoy along with me.
John Montgomery asked a question that cuts right to the core of the Republican Party. He says, reading in his voice, I see you're in support of lowering taxes for groceries, gas, etc. How do you plan on getting those taxes lowered, while also maintaining public funding that we need for roads, education, etc.?
I think that's a great question. Our state has to be careful. It is a part of the Republican Party's platform and plans, generally speaking, to decrease taxes. However, we still have to pay for goods and services and things that the state is required to provide. We still have to provide for education. We still have to provide for infrastructure. Actually, the press conference I'm going to has to do with our infrastructure. And so it is a balance. I think often What we're looking at is potentially, lowering taxes in one area and kind of marrying that with, where those cuts can come in the budget. Or sometimes it's a balance of, this tax is not really fair to the people of the state of Missouri, but this tax is a better way to tax people, if that makes sense. There are just different types of taxes, and each one creates a motivating factor or a lack of motivation for economic growth within our state as well.
I thought about that when you guys passed the gas tax in the last year or two, because our legislators run overwhelmingly by the Republican Party. The Republican Party is known for not being tax friendly, but they needed funding for transportation, I forget.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so how do you pass the tax? Well, you guys ended up passing a gas tax
Mm-hmm.
that if you collect your receipts, you can submit them at the end of the year and get a refund specifically on the gas tax. So,
Yeah.
so making it semi-optional.
Yeah, and I wasn't there at that time, but I will tell you, it's
Was that
still.
pre you?
It was pre
'Cause
me.
this is your first term.
First term,
Okay,
yeah. But I will tell you, it's still a conversation going on. There are still people very upset about that.
Yeah.
There are still people really happy about that. It's one of those that sort of split some people within the Republican Party a little bit. So that was an interesting conversation. It was going on while I was running for office, so it was something that came up quite a bit.
I do want to allow the floor to remain open. Should anybody want to join the conversation, just shoot your hand in the air, and I'll put a representative in charge of calling on you. A question from Hannah Starkey is about the death penalty. She says the death penalty as of right now is legal in Missouri. Do you feel that will ever change? People get wrongfully convicted all the time. Should this be something that is more talked about?
So it's an interesting conversation because it wasn't something I thought about before I went to the legislature, but I did have the opportunity to actually vote on this issue last year as a budget item. So in our budget, one of our House members offered an amendment to the budget that would have essentially just defunded the process of the death penalty in the state of Missouri. And I did vote for that. I think that one person wrongfully convicted and put to death is too many. And I think that, when you look at our judicial system, it's not perfect. And so to risk that for one person potentially wrongfully convicted, to me isn't worth it. So yeah, I would be in support of changing that for Missouri.
A question, Kaylee Neighbor had a couple bangers. This one, she says, you recently voted yes to SB 34. Authorizes schools to offer elective courses on the Bible. She asks, in what ways do you think this will have a positive and negative impacts on school systems around the U.S.? Let's keep it to Missouri.
Sure. I think offering choices to students is great. It's not something that would obviously be required. It's an elective, but I think offering that opportunity to students is a good thing. Maybe there are students who think that is something that would pique their interest, and I think having as many options as possible for students to choose something that sort of aligns with their interests in their schooling is really important.
Reagan Irwin asks about the opioid crisis. Is there a question?
There is one.
We'll get back to Reagan in a moment.
Okay. So in terms of, sorry.
It's all right. You're surprised